Welcome to Jacked History. You most likely have heard the name Arlington National Cemetery. It's hard to miss when so many presidents and other prominent figures have called it their final resting place. Aside from that, the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is one of America's most notable public ceremonies that occurs 24/7. To put it simply, Arlington is America's VIP cemetery. It's the hottest and most exclusive resting place in the United States of America for all the coolest kids.
But in the club, we all fam. What?
You can't turn any direction without seeing the headstones of a famous war hero, president, statesman, politician, Supreme Court justice, general, actor, musician, businessman, educator, athlete, or so many other people of note, including their spouses. But how did this legendary chunk of land, which is just a stone's throw away from Washington, D.C., come to be? Well, my friends, let me tell you how it came to be here at Jacked History. It all started with a guy named George Washington. Ever heard of him? The father of the United States? Peter, have you heard of him? Okay, good. A lot of people may not realize it, but there are no direct descendants of Washington because he could never have kids. Smallpox exposure. Unlike Thomas Jefferson, who left a very large number of descendants throughout Virginia.
However, according to my DNA database, you are a direct descendant of our third president.
Regardless, old Jorge Washington did marry a widow named Martha Custis and raised her two young children at his Mount Vernon estate as if they were his own. The boy's name was John Parke Custis. When John came of age, he sold a bunch of his biological father's land so he could purchase land closer to his mother and stepfather near Mount Vernon, land which he renamed Arlington. Now, John was, to put it plainly, kind of a f***up. His stepdad did his best to give him advice, but he continually made bad decisions in business. It got to the point that John was finally able to convince his stepdad to join him during the Siege of Yorktown, the final battle of the American Revolution. But right as the British were surrendering, John died of a fever he had contracted in the camp. It was at this time John's young son, George Washington Parke Custis, was sent to live with his grandparents at Mount Vernon, where he was raised as one of their own children. Once GWPC entered adulthood, he began building a beautiful mansion on the Arlington land he had inherited from his father. He started his family there soon after and had one child survive in adulthood, Mary Anna Randolph Custis. Before I go any further, you need to understand that most of the prominent people in early US history all kind of knew each other. They were either related to each other or had close business ties that went back all the way to England over 100 years before.
You sound like you're from London. Yeah.
And since Northern Virginia was the epicenter of early American wealth and power, they all lived near each other too. Like I said, Arlington was just a stone's throw away from what would become Washington, D.C., and was just a few miles from Mount Vernon where George Washington lived. Before Washington, D.C. became a thing, Alexandria, Virginia, which shared a border with Arlington, was the business, political, and population power base of Virginia, which was the power base of the South. Raised in Alexandria was a little boy named Robert E. Lee. I know because I used to live right down the street from his boyhood home. If you were in Old Town Alexandria anytime around 2017, 2018, you might have seen me drunkenly stumbling past his house on my way back from getting shit-wrecked at Murphy's Pub on King Street. And I gotta tell you, don't walk on 300-year-old cobblestone streets when you're drunk. My back is still paying for it to this day.
Doctor said I need a backiotomy.
Anywho, Robert E. Lee also came from a prominent family. His father, Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee, was not only the 9th governor of Virginia, but one of George Washington's most beloved cavalry officers during the Revolution. It was Henry who gave Washington's eulogy upon his death in 1799. It only made sense that a promising young military officer like Lee, who came from a prestigious family background, would marry a proper Virginia lady like Mary, who also came from a prestigious lineage. That and they were cousins. You know, like third cousins, which, who cares, right? I should be able to marry my third cousin if I want to marry my third cousin, right? I mean, I never knew any of my third cousins because, well, my family was a bunch of nobodies. Going on. Okay, so this up-and-coming American military officer, who was the son of an American Revolution legend, and his wife, who is the great-granddaughter of the father of the country, should have been able to live their lives in peace at the house once they inherited it upon the death of GWPC in 1857, right? Well, yeah, they kind of did, until 1861, when the American Civil War kicked the fuck off and everything their parents and grandparents fought for in the Revolution went to shit. Let's go down a basic timeline to better understand what happened from there. Fort Sumter falls to the Confederate Army on April 13, 1861. The Civil War has officially started. 7 days later, Union officer Robert E. Lee resigns his commission in the U.S. Army and joins the Army of the Confederacy as Union troops are called to build up in D.C., just a stone's throw away from his new home at Arlington. 2 weeks after that, Virginia militia, not professionally trained Confederate soldiers,
why not join the Army Reserve? Be all that you can be on the weekends.
occupied the property because of the large hill it had looking down on Washington, D.C., which would make it a perfect artillery position to attack the Union capital. Mary wasn't as delusionally stupid as the militia, who thought they could somehow take on tens of thousands of Union soldiers. So 1 week after that, she fled Arlington to her family's house in rural Virginia. 10 days after that, the Union Army from D.C. easily took Arlington and surrounding Virginia communities. Over a year after that, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in Union territory. A few months later, a temporary village was constructed on the property to house up to 3,000 recently freed slaves. A year after that, with the war now going on 3 years and the death toll in the hundreds of thousands, neighboring cemeteries were full and they needed more space to bury soldiers. The government acquired the land from Mary Lee, who was still hiding out in the country. They put it up for auction and ended up being the only bidders, so it was their land now.
It's mine.
Not only did they choose Arlington to bury the dead because of its proximity to the capital, but by this time Robert E. Lee was the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia and had been giving the Union Army a run for their money for the better part of 3 years. Using his land to bury Union dead was more than just a logistical thing. It was a statement to him that he could never use his home and land again once the war was over.
Hey,
On May 13th, shortly after the deadly Battle of the Wilderness, the first Union soldier was buried on the property. Thousands would follow before the war was over. Okay, so now it's April of 1865 and the war is over. Obviously, the Lee family isn't going to be picking up where they left off, so a major campaign to rebury soldiers who had died around Northern Virginia was underway at Arlington. This included Confederate soldiers who had died at both battles of Bull Run. Robert and Mary Lee both died in the early 1870s, and their remaining assets were handed down to their oldest child, George Washington Custis Lee. Soon after his mother died, he brought a lawsuit against the federal government claiming the land was unlawfully seized during the war. You would imagine the powers that be would have had a cavalier attitude about the whole thing, but he actually won the lawsuit in 1882 in a 5-4 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. By the way, guess what lawyer gave him assistance in his case?
Robert Todd Lincoln.
The son of Abraham Lincoln, who we covered in episode 3. He also ended up being buried at Arlington when he died. It's nice to see the kids getting along since their parents couldn't. And everyone lived happily ever after. The end. Just kidding. Shut up. Listen to me real quick. Before we proceed, here's a history lesson within the history lesson. Sandwiched between the years of Reagan's and Daddy Bush's special relationship with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and Baby Bush's and Obama's awkward relationship with Vladimir Putin was the often forgotten about relationship of Bill Clinton and Russian President Boris Yeltsin. As if being the first democratically elected Russian leader in forever wasn't hard enough, old Boris also shared a debilitating problem that many American leaders had in common. He was a raging alcoholic. And a few lucky people got to witness it during Yeltsin's first visit to the United States in September of 1994. In the dead of the night, U.S. Secret Service agents discovered Boris drunker than Stalin was on power, standing on Pennsylvania Avenue, yelling for a cab in nothing but his underwear. When confronted, he refused to go back inside the Blair house where he was staying because, get this, he wanted to get some pizza, which is one of the most American things I can think of other than baseball, the automotive industry, and McDonald's. But this is the best part. The next night, he got drunk and did it again. Once again, Secret Service agents were scrambling to grab him faster than that time they tried to go save Jackie in her big old dump truck. You can't make this stuff up, man. There's a reason it's called Arlington National Cemetery and not the Lee family dead body farm. The property was completely useless to George, so he immediately sold the property back to the federal government and received a payout of $4.3 million in today's money.
I'm rich, bitch!
And there you have it. Those are the origins of America's most famous cemetery. Of course, there was a lot more amazing history to follow, but if you want a part 2, you'll have to let me know in the comments section. You know, for the algorithm. Please like, subscribe, and share, or Peter is going to get buried in Arlington National Cemetery. Alive.
Arlington National Cemetery, a resting place of legends, the who's who of American. It belongs to the United States, no longer Bobby Lee. You learned it here at Jack History.